Hi, I'm Krutika, and today's conversation is with my brother Orm. Even though he's 7 years younger than me, his ability to pause, reflect, and carry a sense of self awareness has been something I've quietly admired, especially because I know it's a practice he's worked hard to cultivate. So, in this episode, we sit down to talk about his journey unmasking identity. He spent his early years in India before moving to the UK at the age of 9. The culture shock, the sense of being sidelined, and an initial struggle to fit in fueled his desire to belong. For a while, that meant trying to embrace being British until he realised he's also Indian. It's a struggle I know many British Indians and people from other ethnic minority backgrounds can relate to, myself included. In our conversation, we explore what identity means to him and shine a light on both the challenges and the beauty of embracing dual cultures. So often, we move through life without pausing to think about the building blocks that make us who we are. This conversation really made me stop and reflect on my own identity, and it may just do the same for you. Hello, so good to have you on my podcast, Orm. How are you today?
Yeah, I'm well. Had a bit of a sort of a productive morning, so I have my coffee next to me to keep me awake and alive for the rest of the call, and some water as well in case I get thirsty from the excessive talking.
Yes, and we know you like to have a little natter. And actually, you mentioned the early morning, and I know you don't like talking about the altruistic things that you get involved in, but you do a bit of volunteering. How was the volunteering this morning? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
So I volunteer for a charity called Helping Hands. They are based in, I guess it's Willesden and Kenton, so it's from a mandir or a temple. And what they do is they have a couple of initiatives. So this is outside of the sort of religious sort of things that a mandir or a temple would preach and work on. So they go out and do outreaches, which means they go to the homeless or areas of London that have homeless people to provide them the basic necessities, say whether it's water, basic food necessities, hygiene products. If it's a cold evening or a cold sort of set of month, then maybe they'll provide them blankets, sleeping bags, a warm drink, which is normally the sort of an essential. Even in the summer, a warm drink also helps. This time round, it was actually slightly different because we had a partner charity with us called Hand on Heart, and they essentially are another charity that do something similar, but they like to collaborate with neighbouring charities to provide a sort of a collaborative approach to fix or approach this problem of homelessness in London. Then it's always a surreal morning when I do any of the volunteering because you're there and you want to help, but deep down you wish you don't see anyone. So it's sort of a double-pronged approach. You want to come back with as much goods that you go out with, but ultimately we don't. We always run out, which kind of shows there is people that need help. So ironically, today I did a social media video for the other charity, which I'm not massive into social media. I use it mainly for memes and laughs and football banter. I don't post much on social media. So even this is a bit of a strange experience for myself, but I had to record a 2 minute sort of clip for the charity. And it was a bit awkward, but I mentioned these topics. I mentioned these points. You know, we're fortunate that we can go to these charities and provide help to these people from a place of privilege. We come back to our homes and, you know, we have shelter, food, etc. And then you come home and you're grateful for it. For me, I'm a bit different in how I approach and understand these issues and societal issues. I come back and I'm more like, this was a benefit for me more than it was for the person that I'm giving to. So maybe it's a bit of a selfish approach and trying to be charitable at the same time. Yeah, it's a long-winded way of saying I did some volunteering in the morning.
Can I just firstly say that the honesty that you've kind of just portrayed there in terms of it benefits you more than you think them? I think very few people would admit that, because a lot of the times when we do charitable things, it does have that positive impact on our own well-being. And you mentioned, you know, coming from a place of privilege and sort of recognizing that it's a reminder, isn't it, about that gratitude and realizing what we have in our life. And, you know, I think we've also spoken in the past about how often with this volunteering activity that you do, there's a queue of people wanting to get involved and help. It's almost like you have too many people, isn't it?
But yeah, it's true. And I completely agree with you. I mean, just to put that into sort of a real real example, next month we have a corporation or some sort of local business that have donated enough manpower or people, I guess, and financials that we're almost redundant in the sense that the volunteers have been told you're going to find it hard to find a slot for yourself. So unless you're somewhat experienced, and luckily I'm one of those a little bit more experienced than others, that I would be called back. So I'm having to be on waiting lists, even though I'm wanting to help. You know, if it's 5 o'clock in the morning, not everyone wants to get up on a Sunday at 5 in the morning. Yet so many people do it and so many people are on the list to try help. It kind of show it the fact that there's loads of people on the list shows that there is some humanity left in the world. And you know, it's not all just doom and gloom. And we're sort of on Instagram, on Twitter, on Facebook, on BBC, whatever news channel, social media on, you always see the doom and gloom of, you know, what's going to happen next and what war will kick off next. So this morning I like to kind of take for myself, and it's a of reminding myself that yes, there's bad in the world and there's people who are willing to address it. So it's a positive start, I guess, because I don't want to, you know, bang on about it. But there's one tidbit that I would leave about this charity, which was several months ago, we came across someone who was very inquisitive about the volunteering we were doing. And this was on site, this was in Good Street. So we do a route via Bond Street, Tottenham Court Road, Good Street, and then Euston, and kind of meet up in King's Cross. And we were going through Good Street and we saw a gentleman who was very inquisitive, and he sat there and he kind of watched us do what we were doing. Then he came up and he said, "Oh, you're that charity that come at the end of every month," along with a bunch of other charities. And we said, "Oh, okay, well, how do you know us?" And he's like, "Oh, well, I was on the other side. I was living in one of those tents, and I was provided food from yourselves and the necessities from yourselves. Another charity provided him a suit, but essentially a group of charities. We didn't like come together and try to collaborate to help this one person. It was just a individual effort from the charities, and he basically took the individual givings from all these charities. It helped him get off the streets because he had some accommodation because they provided him some. And on that very day, it was his first day as a barista. You know, found so that
Wow.
that thing, I think I'll probably take that little story. I'll probably take to the grave, because it's like, you know, we
You
kind of
made a
sit there and we're
difference.
like, we made a difference. I'm not saying I did, but we did, right? It wasn't just one charity, it's a bunch of charities.
Yeah, and that's a fantastic sort of story that you've just told there, that often you feel that what you're doing in the grand scheme of things that you do in the world might not be making a difference, but here you are saying that actually there was evidence that what you and the volunteers and all the various charities were doing, which is fantastic. So thank you for sharing that. Now I feel we could probably just talk about this for the entire episode, which in and of itself is an incredible topic area to discuss, this idea of volunteering, community and giving back. Now I feel this is part of what makes up your identity, which I guess is a segue into what we're going to be talking about. And it's this idea of unmasking identity. And I know it's a topic that you and we've spoken about in many of our chat shit conversations, which for the listeners out there, chat shit as a sort of phrasing is something my siblings and I sort of use when we are just having conversations, rambling on about all sorts of things, stuff that we are probably no experts in, but we often just go off on a tangent. We often, you know, have these conversations when we're on our long walks or on a commute to work or just fancy having a little ramble. So today we'll talk a little bit about identity, and I want to start off by asking, in your opinion, what do you think it is that makes up somebody's identity?
So I'd like to start off by saying it has changed and adapted over time. So if you would have asked me, let's say 10 years ago, I would have probably said something different. As of now, I'm in a bit of a introspection journey. Like I'm looking inwards quite a bit, just because of, I guess, aging, getting of a certain age, and you kind of start questioning most things in society. And maybe I'm at that age. Maybe that's that phase of the life I'm in. For me, identity is at the high level. I would split it into two things: internal factors and external factors. And if I was to go a little bit more into that, internal factors for me are things like your moral compass, your general day-to-day thoughts, the data models that you live by, how you approach life in general. Those are the sort of internal things that I think bring identity to you. And then there's the obvious external stuff. So I know we don't like talking about the way people look or race and religion, but unfortunately, it's how you're born. You know, these aren't factors that you can control. You can obviously change your haircut, but you can't change the color of your skin. You can't change the ethnicity that you're born as. You can't change certain appearances. You can definitely change how you look over time, especially as you grow older. But there's certain things that you're basically destined to look like and be as externally. And the external factors kind of weed into your internal factors. So almost like a Venn diagram, there is things that are independent and there's things that are dependent on each other. So your thoughts, for example, might be swayed by your religious and cultural views, but no matter how you think about it, those things are built and are continuously changing for you. Then there's things like how you see the world could also be based on how you appear, right? So how you experience the world based on who you are and what you look like impacts your thoughts. So I see them as individual factors being internal and external, and they're interweaved to form who you are. Personally, for me, I like to strip things back. I'm an engineer, and I've worked in IT for the last 10 odd years. So I ask the why question more often than most people would, and I say, why? Why does that exist, or why does that happen? And the thing I always bring it back to is that it's the primal ape chimp behavior, right? So we like to look like the person we're sat next to, or we like to think like the person we're sat next to feel like we identify as someone who's, you know, included in the society. So identity for me isn't static. For example, if I was to go to work, I'm putting on the Orm works at a firm identity. I change slightly. I tweak how I talk. I tweak how I walk. I tweak how I dress. So that's sort of a shift in identity. My core identity and my thoughts, my moral compass, my approach to life doesn't change, but it tweaks. Now, if you talk to me on a Friday evening with my friends and we're out, that's a different identity. It's tweaked. It's slightly different. It's still forming your core and you still have your internal and external factors. You can't change those, but it's tweaked. It was just me trying to sort of not give you a completely binary answer. It's to say that identity does shift. It has multiple faces.
Yeah, identity is malleable. Can I just say, I really love how you structured that answer with that kind of two branch approach, but then referencing that Venn diagram, really recognizing that overlap. There are a few things I want to unpack in your answer. I mean, you referenced the external factor as sort of referring to race, religion, sort of cultural customs, that sort of stuff. A personal question, I mean, how much do you think your race, religion, and your customs make up your identity?
So thinking just about myself with how race is for us and culture kind of weeds into it. With religion, we've not really been enforced to be religious. I mean, it's coincidental because at the start of this recording, I said I volunteered with a temple in Mandir. Ironically, I've been to loads of temples and mandirs on the basis that I volunteer for them. So once a month I go. I don't go into the mandir or the temple. I go into the car park. I make it an obvious point that I'm not going there for religious reasons. So I respect Hinduism. That's the religion that I was born into. And I respect its practices. I respect all the rituals, but I don't seem to connect with it on the basis that it doesn't align with my thoughts. I do still, I guess, by default, practice some of the things because it's sort of bedded into the culture that we're brought into. So maybe on that basis, but it's more to do with the cultural norms than it is anything else for me. So being Indian or being British Indian is the thing that probably I culturally relate to.
Yeah, yeah. That's a good way to put it, because I think what often religion and customs boil down to at its core is having that sense of right and wrong, right? And that right and wrong, circling back to what you were saying earlier about identity, is an amalgamation of that internal and external. Something else I wanted to touch on that I made a note of as you were sort of talking about identity is that context switching piece. You mentioned that the Orm at work speaks slightly differently, walks slightly differently versus the Orm you see on a Friday. How much of that do you find yourself doing? And do you often find yourself challenged by that context switching?
So when we spoke about this podcast and we were talking about the topics we would discuss, and identity was a no-brainer for me because I don't think I'm alone in experiencing what I have in terms of like shifting identities and context switching. And then I went back even more. I don't think anyone, like, I think everyone does this. Like, it's not
Mm,
like there's very few people who I think bring their authentic self to every occasion, especially when they're not around people who they really trust. That's come about maybe because I've been interviewing potential candidates for my firm, and I noticed that, and we had a standout candidate because they were really good, but they were just so polished. Like, we had a pre-discussion to say we need to break this guy, not because we were being mean, because we couldn't get his authentic answer. He was almost shaped and formed by AI. Like, his answers were so revised. It was
bit
just
too good
like
to be true.
exactly, yeah. And the reason that stood out for me is because of the recent experience. I have recency bias on that experience, but it's because it made me think, okay, I don't think this is a struggle per se for me, but it's something that everyone goes through. So I'm trying to think about all the different groups that I either socialize in or work in. So, like, I go to play football regularly with the same group of people that I've played with for ages, and the identity that we all share is football. Like, that's the thing we talk about. It's what we live by. It's why we commune together. And that kind of brings me back to the whole chimp and sort of primal thought process, right? We all go to football. So we're going to all bring the sort of, lad behavior, the football banter. That's the identity required to succeed in that environment. And because we've always formed hierarchy in most environments, apes always have an alpha ape, a primal ape, the one that's at the top of the chain, the one that leads the
Hmm.
pack. That happens in all groups, right? Then I think about at work. So I think when you go out for a drink or you go out for a meal with your work colleagues and then you experience a different version of them. And I'm like, I didn't know you did that. The identity that you present to someone isn't going to come through authentically unless you change the environment. And that's something I did forget to mention in my answer on the first question, which was
Hmm.
environment is a massive key for what you identify as in that environment. Because
Yes, yes.
if you strip back the layers and you make someone feel comfortable, they might show themselves differently. They might show their authentic self.
But do you not feel that nowadays, certainly in the work context, there's a bit more embracing of that kind of show up as your authentic self? And I do resonate to that context switching because how I am in the work situation is different to, let's say, how even you and I are. I will maybe use certain different phrasing or terminology, and you want to always, I think, in the corporate working context, present yourself in the most polished manner as you sort of put it earlier, but there is, I think, well, certainly where I work anyway, they try and encourage that, but it's hard, isn't it? And why do you think it's hard to show up authentically in that kind of corporate working environment?
So I'm sorry to keep going back to apes and primal beings because we're not, well, we're fully formed humans. Apes wouldn't want to feel vulnerable because if they show vulnerability, they show weakness. If they show weakness, they're no longer rated in the pack or they may not be as high. But genuinely, people don't want to be vulnerable. When I've experienced work colleagues go through hardship, you don't know about it. You genuinely don't know about it. And it's only after hours when you really talk to them or like, then they go and express what it is that they want to express. And the same thing happens in friend circles, family, etc. My answer to your question is vulnerability. It's people don't want to seem vulnerable. And to feel vulnerable around someone, people just don't have it in them to
Let their
put the
guards
guards
down.
down. We said at the same time, right? Put your
Yeah.
guards down. And what I think I've tried to do in my corporate career is I've tried to be authentic. I've dealt with high net worth people. I've dealt with people who are difficult. I've dealt with people who are superior to me in terms of intellect and just general engineering, but I try to be authentic. I find it's easier to show a little bit of vulnerability. And that could easily be in the sense of, well, I don't know what I'm doing, or "Oh, yeah, it was a bit of a tough day yesterday at home." And it's not to say like you need to divulge information. I think there is an element of privacy when you're especially when we're talking about the workplace. But in general, whether it's with my football friends or with work colleagues or personal friends or family, I think showing vulnerability is something that people just do not want to do. That's probably the answer, I think, vulnerability.
That's a powerful word, Orm. And actually, if I was to challenge you, sometimes I feel being able to be vulnerable might also be something that's difficult or innately a challenge for some individuals because they've grown up. Back to your point that you made earlier, about the whole identity piece, that they might have grown up in an environment where that wasn't welcomed, and therefore they didn't see, those that were around them embodying that trait. So it almost became I can't share what I'm truly feeling or how I truly want to be because everyone around me is always projecting this idea of we're holding it together all the time. There's that perfectionism. So, yes, vulnerability is the thing that we need to embrace a little bit more. But, do you feel that that's also a trait that not everybody can embody because that's not something they grew up with?
I can 100% relate to that. As I said, if you'd asked me this question about identity and sort of the talk we're having right now 10 years ago, I'd kind of given you a very different answer. What I feel is healthy for a human is to have that vulnerability with at least a being, another person, or I guess even if it's your animal friends, your pets, have that connection with someone. And honestly, it's very rewarding to have that ability to actually share who you really are is something that is, you can't take it for granted because you're holding back. Either have that relationship or that element of vulnerability with someone, a group of people or a person, or try to foster that first and then within yourself. Try to be vulnerable within yourself. Can you figure that out for yourself? Who are you really? And I'm not saying I have it figured out because that would be a complete lie, but it's something that I would tell my younger self, let your authentic self be and actually understand who you are, what you want to be, and don't confine to norms. It's something that you always hear older people say, just be yourself. Just be yourself. There isn't a more complicated answer to that.
Do you know what I think is quite powerful with what you've just said there is when it comes to vulnerability, start with almost yourself first. Can you be honest with yourself? And the reason I challenged you on that vulnerability point is because I think you'll know this from conversations we've had. I've struggled with that piece. And that be yourself, so much more easier to say than to actually implement. And that point about being yourself, I know you spent a large part of your childhood in India. Could you just talk us through what was it like living in India? I mean, do you even remember the childhood years that you spent in India? Do you have a distinct memory that you could potentially share with us?
I do remember bits. I can't recollect much. I sort of was in India between the years of, I think, 6 months and just under 9 years, the nine. So it wasn't exactly a massive stint, and it was like the formative years. So what I do remember is I was quite a sport child. I got everything I wanted. So it was a bit of a culture shock, not just because I went from Gujarat to London, but it was more also just being around other people. And I think I didn't really quickly adapt to it. And also moving to the UK without my parents. At the time, I was like, oh, this is quite normal because my siblings have done this. Loads of kids who are immigrants from India or from other parts of the world do make that journey. In hindsight, it's ludicrous because no child in the Western world would do that. So that was one thing. In terms of actually giving you memories or experiences, I have two. Both was semi-comical, I guess, maybe because that's the things I remember. One was we weren't told that there was going to be an earthquake or there was no predictions. It was just a normal day. So we parked up, and on the way to the assembly, we saw our car move, and it was reversing. So we're like, did we put the
Wow.
handbrake on? And then we're like, oh no, yeah, we did. And then other cars started moving, and it was just all a bit of a wobble. I can't
Wow.
remember exactly what the magnitude was, but we came home immediately, and there was cracks on the wall. There was a bit of hysterics outside the house because I guess some people had buildings sort of move quite a bit. Maybe their buildings had fallen over or homes had been damaged. But it was the reason it was a bit comical is because the first question was, is the handbrake on? Not I'll be having an earthquake. The other story, which I guess maybe forms my identity a little bit, I think I was relatively book smart when I was younger. I was like really into my books and always trying to be the best in the class, etc. And we had an art class, and the I think deputy head or head teacher was taking the art class, and we were told to draw a butterfly. I guess butterflies are colourful and it'd make good art, I guess. But I, for whatever reason, I don't know what drove me to do this. I drew a dog, I think. So there was no reason to draw a dog, but I decided a dog was the best outcome from that. So then the deputy head or head teacher who was leading the art class got really annoyed and she literally slapped me around the face. Corporate punishment was, I'm not sure if it's still allowed in India, but it was allowed in India when I was there. And she basically left a handprint on my face. And as I was going home, I was trying to hide that side of my face from my mum so she couldn't see. And she's like, Why is half of your face red?" And I just didn't tell her initially, kind of fobbed it off. And then I eventually told her. And then my uncle saw it, and he saw it at a point it was probably at its worst, so it's quite red. And they asked me why I got slapped. Often, if you get hit for a good reason, like you're being naughty, I think most parents in India were willing to accept that and say, that's fine, you're being naughty, so, you deserve a slap. But on this scenario, drawing a dog instead of a butterfly isn't a good enough reason to be slapped. So the next day, my uncle decided to drive to the teacher's address along with a police officer and threatened to imprison her for inappropriate corporal punishment. And what happened the week after was the school had to sack her, and it became quite heavily known that if you try to mess with me, then
Your uncle will
they will
come and
get
give her.
sacked. Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, the reason I said that was it's a core memory because it formed me as like a kid. I was already a goody two shoe, but then I became even more of a goody two shoe and I sort of ran by the books. I don't think I've ever gone to an art class
And
and
drawn a
drawn
dog.
a dog instead of a butterfly. So, yeah, maybe that formed some of my identity.
Can I just say, like, the two core memories that you've just described here, if I think about the subtext of it, they're pretty. I mean, horrific might be too strong a word, but they are pretty horrific things. An earthquake and sort of being slapped. But actually, you've used comedy to kind of make light of it. Is comedy something that you often leverage as part of your own identity to make sense of things?
I think because so much of what we experience as adults is also serious, I think I default to comedy.
Mm.
It's I don't want to use therapeutic terms and say it's a coping mechanism, but it kind of maybe is a coping mechanism. I don't want to say I've gone through much hardship in my life. I think I've had, somewhat of a fragmented childhood, an element of immigration,
Mm.
constant instability in housing, moving around when you don't have a stable home, you're constantly moving around, staying with someone else and not your parents. So maybe that is an element of instability. But even then I was always quite grateful for it. So comedy kind of just was the thing we went to. Even amongst our friend circle, it's often the default language. I'm not saying it's part of your identity to be a class clown, but sharing laughter is something that really connects myself with my siblings, my friends, my family. So maybe if I was to look at it from a third person, maybe it's an element of a coping mechanism, but it's a way of looking at things in a positive light rather than getting bogged down on the negatives of it.
And obviously, I've known you for all your life, and I know that you do like the banter. You mentioned also, and that ties in with what you were saying earlier, that you don't use social media much, but when you do use it, you're using it for memes and for a bit of football banter. So I guess that makes sense. I mean, we've spoken about you being in India. You also referred to yourself as being Indian, British, Indian. What is it like mixing those cultures? Have you thought about what it means to be Indian and British Indian? Does that ever play on your mind?
When I initially immigrated and I was sort of learning the language, learning the social norms, learning what a microwave was. Like the first time I saw a microwave, I thought it was a TV because I'd never seen one. So like learning all the different cultural norms and language, I kind of lost touch with my Indian self. So it's almost like, because you're so focused, you're so hyper focused on trying to adapt. I was quite the outcast in the class because when I joined my first day in I think it was year four, term one, and it was like everyone turned to page X and start reading. And I got given a book, and I'm like, what are these weird lines on this page? Like, what do I do? So it's weird because when I was younger, I ran away from being Indian, not in a bad way. I did still, love Diwali. I still loved Indian mithai, Indian food. I think my Gujarati has suffered a little from not communicating in it on a daily basis, and I still can't read and write it like I used to, 20 years ago. But I think it's a constant battle. And the question I often ask myself and other people who know multiple languages is, what language do you think in? Because that really tells you your subconscious self. Because at one point, I don't remember the switch, but at one point it happened, right? Because I didn't know English well enough to be articulate, to be cognizant enough to have cohesive conversation. So in my brain, I was thinking in Gujarati. But as soon as, I guess, when I learnt the language enough and I could formulate thoughts, formulate opinions in it, it probably made that switch. And the thing I kind of miss is having that thought process in my mother tongue. And sometimes it's really strange, and you can maybe hear it in my speech at some points, but it comes out and it's like I sound more Indian because there's certain words that I was accustomed to saying in a certain way. And that has been something of a lesson when I sort of moved into the corporate world and I was saying words that, weren't said correctly because that's how you thought they were pronounced. You weren't taught exactly the correct phonics of particular words. So I was like, okay, that's a bit strange. So I would say it's a bit of a convoluted way of saying I probably embraced the Indian side more once I'd appreciated how little I embraced it. Like how when I felt like I lost it is when I started embracing it more. So I still don't say I'm just Indian. I'm British Indian or I'm British Asian, but I want to say at some point in my life I'm probably going to have to relearn some of the things I was taught when I was younger, right? And to not lose that. I'm very proud of my heritage. I'm very proud of where I'm from, and I want to own it. I don't want to run away from it like I did when I was a kid, because at that time I felt like I was an outcast. My identity didn't fit in with everyone else's when I was in class.
That's so beautifully, honestly put. And that point around, running away from being Indian. If I even just think about sometimes how I refer to my name, if I say my name in the mother tongue, it's Krutika, right? And I remember when I came to this country, often the teachers mispronouncing my name, and I hated my name for the longest time, which is such a sad thing, like to think about now. And actually, even when I introduced this podcast, I have anglicized my name to hi, I'm Krutika, which has just become a default. And
So just on that, because you said about names, right? And I have quite an ethnic name, Orm.
yes,
It's not exactly. It's a pretty easy name to pronounce because there's like Orm's law, and
yeah,
people who do science would have known it. But I guess I don't know when it was. Maybe it was a few years ago. I started drinking coffee maybe a couple of years ago, actually. So maybe it was a couple of years ago. And I went to a coffee shop and I went to order my coffee. And because people kept getting my name wrong on coffee orders, it gets really confusing when you're at the end and you don't know what your coffee is because they're shouting correct names. So they asked, "Oh, what name should I put on the coffee?" And I stuttered and I sort of took a pause and I said, J, because my name isn't Jay, but I just said Jay, right? And the barista goes, "Why did you stutter?" And I was like, "Well, it's not my real name. It's just the name I give now because it's easier." And she goes, "Oh, no, no, be proud of your ethnic background. What's your actual name?" And I'll put it on the coffee. So I said, "It's Aum, Aum." So obviously I waited on the side, waited for my coffee. And then she wrote Omar. So if even after telling me, so even after
so
the whole
even
spiel,
after you said she
even
did.
after the spiel of saying be proud of your name, and I mean I obviously I just laughed. In that scenario, I just owned the situation and I kind of don't want to make her feel bad. If they've asked for a coffee name, I just say Jay.
My name is Kay often in situations where I know people are going to struggle with it. And actually, in the most part, the anglicized version of my name, Krutika, I quite like the way it sort of sounds. But I do just remember just hating, my own name, which is an awful thing, right? Because your name is such a large part of your identity. I remember reading or hearing somewhere that humans are so attuned to their name. It almost kind of alerts you, and you almost feel that kind of sense of, oh, okay, when you're in a meeting, just watch out for it when someone says your name. Notice that feeling that you get, because it's such a thing. It's you, it's what you're called by. Now I wanted to come onto something which it talks to, I suppose, your identity and the fact that you spent a lot of your time in India, you're now in the UK. Have you ever experienced racism?
I'd say I have, and some of those stories and experiences can't be erased because it kind of stay with you. Nothing too crazy,
Mm.
but something that I did experience, which again, it has a bit of a comical twist to it because it was just hilarious. And I'm hoping this doesn't trigger anyone because a bit of a trigger warning, I guess. But so in my prior role at my current firm, I used to be a infrastructure engineer. So basically, you deal with anything hardware, software, servers, etc. Ironically, on that day, it was printers. So our printer toner had gone out, and I worked for a corporate firm, so big printers, big toners. And a toner basically is where the ink is stored in a printer, and it had to be replaced. And because it's chemical waste, you can't just throw it in the bin. So it has to be disposed of in a particular way. And we had like a waste bin in the lower ground floor where they would collect toners. So I had the toner ready, and I said I'll just get it down to lower ground when I'm on my way out. Inside, like grown my beard a little bit. I was wearing my black work trousers, black work shoes, puffer jacket because it was pretty cold, and a black bag. Normal
I
work
can see
attire,
where
but
this is going.
yeah. So I decided to take the toner out, and I left it near the lifts. And I thought just before I head out to the tube, I'm going to go to the use the men's room and then come back. So I'd come back out of the men's room, and I I thought I'd left the toner right near the lift, and I was trying to looking for it, but then I realized it'd been flung across the sort of the foyer lift area, and I sort of turned around and thought, who's done that? Like, why has that happened? And then I went to pick it up and turned around. When I turned around, I saw a lady and two very butch looking guys staring me down. I was a bit puzzled because I'm like, at that time, I think I'd been at the firm for like 3 years, but it was kind of parallel to another firm. So we shared the lift and foyer area, but we had independent offices. So they may have not seen me across the 3 years that I'd been there. This was pre-COVID, so we're in every day. But they did see me put the toner there when I went to the toilet, I guess. And when I came out, obviously they saw me pick up the toner. So this was probably an interaction for like a minute or two, but it felt like an hour. Like it felt so long. They're staring me down, and it was a weird stare off because I'm holding this toner. And to picture what the toner looked like, it's a cylindrical device with rivets in it, and at the end of that is like a mechanical thing that clicks into the printer. I guess to the naked eye, it looks like a missile or some sort of
Device
explosive
that's going to
device.
detonate.
Exactly, right. So if you're an IT person, you would know that's a toner. You would know what printer it's for even. But it was a somewhat of a suspicious device. So this minute ticks off, and I'm turning around, looking at them. They're looking back at me. No one is saying a single word. And I'm like, well, this is weird because what do I do now? Because they look quite vicious and aggressive. They look like they were gonna sort of not attack me, but like at least take me
Pin
down.
you
And it
down.
was, yeah, you don't just come to address someone with two butch looking dudes just for a friendly chat, right? That's not what they were there for. There's probably about 4 or 5 meters between us. And then I had to break the ice and say, this is just an ink toner. I work for the firm here, and all I'm doing is disposing of this in lower ground. They didn't say anything. And then after about a few seconds later, the two butch guys kind of like thought, "Oh, he's probably telling the truth," and then he'd walk off. And then I had the awkward thing of waiting for the lift again, pressed the lift button, and then I saw the lady who was obviously suspicious of me being, I guess, a terrorist. And as soon as the lift doors closed, all I did was burst out in hysterical laughter. And I was in the lift by myself, and I just could not stop laughing because I was like, what on earth has just happened? And what do I do about this? Like, who's going to relate to this story? you know?
Yeah. Probably
And
one of your
so
other Indian friends.
yeah, probably. It was just a strange experience. And then the next day I came in and told my manager and he couldn't stop laughing. They didn't accuse me of anything, right? So it's strange. They didn't,
But
but
it's
their actions,
prejudice, isn't it? Is that the word?
yeah,
It's, I mean, they are all stereotypes, right? Because they profile, male with beard, black attire, backpack, and that's probably what they saw. And beyond that, the brain just kind of formed that connection that, oh, this has got to be someone who's going to detonate a device. So it's crazy how stereotypes, and actually, stereotypes is something that, you grow up with, maybe because of those around you, your surroundings, and that forms a part of someone's identity as well. Like it's a subset of what you believe in and what you hold to sort of be true. And clearly for this woman and these two butch men that were eyeing you
yeah.
up, that's what they thought. They were like, oh, hang on a minute, this guy's going to blow up this toner on us.
Yeah. The thing is, I think if I was a bit mature about it, maybe I would have approached that situation differently. Because I'm a bit immature and I sort of find the laugh in a situation. I kind of laughed about it, but it could have easily been turned into a whole spiel, right? It could have been a whole corporate action. Why do they suspect me of doing this? But realistically, you experience it in day to day life.
Yeah.
To people sometimes who obviously aren't from an Indian descent, an Indian background, come up to you and be like, "Oh, I had a curry last night." I was like, "Oh, good for you, mate. Why'd you have to come and tell me?" Literally, it's like, why? Why do I care? And it's kind of just hilarious because I think it's more of like they feel awkward and naive, and then they don't know what to say. Whereas, like, I'm not going to go up to someone and be like, I had something from your culture last night. So yeah,
Yeah.
I'd say some form of racism. I haven't taken it to heart. I pretty much own it.
Do you see your kind of blending of two cultures, the Indian and then the British Indian, a challenge, a strength, or a combination of both?
I think it's both. The strengths in that it gives you more tools in your toolbox, I guess. It gives you the ability to kind of fit in most cases, I guess, because then you could fit in with people who are of like ethnic backgrounds. If you get into an
Yeah.
Uber in London, you're not being driven around by someone who's probably grown up to be British. They're probably someone who's from another background, and like you could just fit. Honestly, I just fit in because I'm like, oh, I can talk to you about it. And then you go into another context, and then you could fit in. So I think mostly it's a strength. Where it is a struggle, I'd say, with quotation marks or air quotes, is that you got to really figure out which culture you reside with more at some point. Because not saying you can't have the best of both worlds, but you don't want to lose your sort of the culture, the religion, or whatever it is that you identify with at its core, you don't want to lose it. And when you try to do too much of both, it's not going to work. Right. So I said in this call that I've lost my ability to articulate my words and have strong conversations in Gujarati, which is obviously my mother tongue. It's actually my first language. Like, Gujarati is my first language, yet I can't read and write it, which to some degree I have some regret to not build. And maybe I could in the future
Should have done a
learn it.
GCSE or should have done a
Yeah, I
GCSE.
get could have done a GCSE Gujarati, I guess. But it's something that you like I don't want to lose. So I guess if I was to give you the perfect answer, it would be like a slider. If you have a 100% identity slider, it would be not 100% of either, but to have an element of where you live. Because I think environmental factors play a massive thing into your identity. Like, we can't, as Indians, come to the UK and not embrace the
Yes.
culture here. You won't fit in. Not that you won't fit in, but you won't appreciate the country that you're in, right? And that's what I find is sometimes a problem for some of the older generation or people who aren't willing to change how they think, how they are. Because if you go somewhere else and expect to be where you were when you left, you're not going to get that, right? You're not
Yeah.
going to get that. You're not going to get the best of both worlds. So for example, football being one of them is something that I embraced at a young age, and I'm glad I did, because it's majority of my spare time goes into football. So what I would say is, like, have a slider, and it's like your identity should be who you're born as and what your cultural norms are, I guess, and what your family is, but also your environment. If you don't embrace your environment, you will end up either alienating yourself or alienating others. And this is the thing, right? I said being your authentic self, and it's kind of a contradictory point to say, don't be your authentic self. I'm just saying, be authentic, but embrace the environment. Because if you don't,
Yeah.
then you're doing a disservice to where you're living. You can't just ignore that you live in the UK and just
Yes.
continue to live as you were just because you were born a certain way or your cultural norms are a certain way.
Yeah, I love that. And that is such a beautiful point to sort of wrap up on, that you've got to recognize where it is that you are and your surroundings. You can't just be ignorant to that and go about living your life thinking, right, well, this is who I am, and not be willing to be malleable in that respect. Now, with all my guests, I end with one final question, which is, what journey are you on next?
So I think the journey that I'm on is just more self-discovery, trying to figure out what gets me ticking, what gets me going, and just trying to embrace, like I said, my authentic self, and maybe in that also embrace being Gujarati, being Indian, and trying to reconnect maybe with my identity, my core identity, whilst doing all of that, still keeping the moral compass that I think I've built and building on it.
I'll hold you accountable to it. Maybe I'll start having our chat shit conversations in Gujarati, if you think it'll help you. On that note, thank you very much once again, Great to have you on my podcast.
Thank you for having me. I think this was a great experience. Thinking about a topic and like dissecting it was quite fun.
I'm
So thank you
glad
for
you
having me on.
found it a good experience. Thank you once again. Thank you for listening to this episode of Journeys with Krutika. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and share. I'd love for you to hit the follow button wherever you get your podcast so you never miss an episode. And if you have a journey that you want to share, email me at journeyswithkrutika@gmail.com or reach out via my socials. I'm on Instagram and TikTok. Just search Journeys with Krutika, because your journey is extraordinary.